My daughter-in-law Vanessa laughed like a hyena when the lawyer announced I'd only inherited an old painting. My son, Michael, got the $3 million construction company, and I got what looked like a garage sale reject. That laugh told me exactly what 46 years of marriage had been worth to my late husband, Robert. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me back up and tell you how we got to this delicious moment. It was February 15th, exactly 1 month after Robert's funeral, and we were sitting in Charles Blackwood's law office like something out of a bad movie. You know the scene. Mahogany desk, leather chairs, and enough tension to power a small city. Dorothy Henderson, Mr. Blackwood read from Robert's will, shall inherit the oil painting titled Sunset over Lake Michigan, currently hanging in the master bedroom. He paused, probably expecting some reaction from me. I just sat there, hands folded, while Vanessa practically vibrated with glee beside Michael. And to my beloved son, Michael Henderson, the lawyer continued, I leave Henderson Construction Company, including all assets, properties, and business interests, valued at approximately $3.2 million. That's when Vanessa lost it. She actually clapped her hands together like a child on Christmas morning. Well, she said, turning to me with those cold blue eyes, guess you were just a useless old wife after all. Her smile was sharper than broken glass. Michael shifted uncomfortably but said nothing. My own son, sitting there like a bump on a log while his wife insulted the woman who'd raised him, the woman who'd worked 2 jobs to put him through college after Robert's first business failed. I looked at that smug little face and smiled back. How interesting, I said calmly. Oh, if only I'd known then what I was about to discover. That ugly little painting was going to give me everything I needed to wipe that grin right off her perfectly made-up face. Mr. Blackwood cleared his throat. There are a few more provisions, but those are the major bequests. He handed me a key. This is for the safe deposit box containing the painting and some personal items your husband wanted you to have. As we left the office, Vanessa was already on her phone, probably calling her mother to share the good news. Michael walked beside me in silence until we reached our cars. Mom, he started, but I held up my hand. Don't, Michael, just don't. I got in my car and drove away, leaving him standing there looking guilty, but not guilty enough to actually do anything about it. Little did any of us know that Robert had left me the most valuable thing of all. He just hadn't realized it himself. The painting was even uglier than I remembered, if that was possible. I'd picked it up from the bank that afternoon and was now standing in my living room holding what looked like a toddler's first attempt at a sunset. Robert had always claimed it was painted by some local artist in the 1970s, but honestly, I'd seen more artistic talent in kindergarten finger paintings. 3 days had passed since the will reading, and I was still processing Vanessa's charming assessment of my 46-year marriage. Useless old wife. The words kept echoing in my head like a bad song you can't shake. I decided to hang the monstrosity in my bedroom, mainly because that's where Robert had always kept it, and partly because I figured if I was going to be haunted by his final gift, it might as well be somewhere private, where I could glare at it in peace. The painting was heavier than I expected as I struggled to position it on the wall hook. One corner slipped from my grasp and knocked against the bedroom dresser. That's when I heard it, a soft rustling sound, like paper moving inside the frame. Curious now, I laid the painting face down on my bed and examined the back. The frame was old, held together with small metal clips that had loosened over the years. One corner of the brown paper backing had come loose, curling up slightly. My heart started beating faster. Robert had been secretive about this painting, almost protective of it. I'd always assumed it held some sentimental value I didn't understand. Maybe there was something more to it after all. I carefully peeled back more of the paper backing. Sure enough, there was something tucked between the canvas and the frame. My fingers found the edge of what felt like a photograph. I worked it loose gently, not wanting to damage whatever it was. When I finally pulled it free and turned it over, my blood ran cold. It was a photograph of a woman in a hotel room. A woman I recognized immediately, though she looked younger, maybe 5 or 6 years younger. She was partially undressed, laughing at something the camera couldn't capture, her hair tousled like she had just gotten out of bed. The woman was Vanessa. But here's the thing that made my hand shake as I stared at that picture. This photo had to be at least 6 years old based on her appearance. Michael and Vanessa had only been married for 7 years. I sank down onto my bed, still holding the photograph. Robert must have known about this. But why had he hidden it? Why hadn't he told Michael? And more importantly, who had taken this picture? That's when I noticed something else. In the background of the photo, barely visible on the nightstand, was a man's watch, an expensive one with a distinctive gold band. I knew that watch. I'd seen it recently. Sleep was impossible that night. I lay there staring at the ceiling, that photograph burning a hole in my nightstand drawer where I had hidden it. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Vanessa's mocking face from the lawyer's office, heard her calling me a useless old wife. Well, wouldn't she be surprised to know this useless old wife had stumbled onto something very interesting indeed. By morning, I'd made a decision. I needed to know more about when this photo was taken and who took it. More importantly, I needed to figure out why Robert had hidden it instead of exposing his daughter-in-law's infidelity. I started with what I knew. The photograph looked professional, not like a casual snapshot. The hotel room was upscale, Egyptian cotton sheets, expensive furniture visible in the background, and that watch on the nightstand was definitely the key to everything. Around 10 a.m., I drove to Michael's office. Henderson Construction was busy as always, inherited success, humming along nicely. Michael was in a meeting, but I waited, sipping coffee and observing his employees. Funny how different people looked at you when you weren't the boss's mother anymore. Just the boss's mother who got the leftovers. "Mom," Michael said when he finally appeared, looking harried, "this is a surprise. Everything okay?" "Just wanted to see how you're settling into your father's office," I lied smoothly. What I really wanted was to get a better look at his desk, his personal items, see if anything jogged my memory about that watch. He showed me around, proud as a peacock. Robert's office hadn't changed much. Same heavy desk, same leather chairs, same family photos lined up like little soldiers. That's when I spotted it, sitting in a small dish beside his computer monitor. The watch from the photograph. "That's a beautiful watch," I commented casually. "New?" Michael glanced over and shrugged. "Dad's old watch. I've been meaning to get it fixed. The band's been loose for years. Actually, it went missing for a while a few years back. Turned up in the weirdest place." My pulse quickened. "Oh, where was that?" "Vanessa found it at some hotel when we were there for a wedding. Must have fallen off during dinner or something." "Lucky she spotted it, right?" "Lucky indeed." I smiled and nodded, filing away every word. So, Vanessa had been at a hotel with Robert's watch, a watch that ended up photographed in a hotel room with her in a state of undress. The pieces were starting to fit together, and I didn't like the picture they were forming. After leaving Michael's office, I drove straight to the downtown area. There were 3 upscale hotels within walking distance of where that wedding would have been held. If I was right about what I suspected, someone was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. But first, I needed to do some research and maybe make a few phone calls. The Grand View Hotel on Michigan Avenue had exactly the kind of upscale rooms I'd seen in that photograph. I knew because I'd spent the afternoon playing tourist, asking for a tour of their amenities for my upcoming anniversary celebration. The lie came surprisingly easily. Our suite all feature Italian marble bathrooms and Egyptian cotton linens, the overeager sales manager had gushed, leading me through a room that looked remarkably similar to the background in Vanessa's photo. But it was the hotel bar where I hit gold. "Mrs. Henderson," the bartender, a friendly man named Tony, recognized me immediately. "Haven't seen you in ages. How's Mr. Robert doing?" My heart sank a little. Tony obviously hadn't heard about the funeral. "He passed away last month, Tony." "Oh no, I'm so sorry." "He was a good man. Used to come in here regular-like, especially these past few years." Tony wiped down the glass thoughtfully. "Always with that pretty young blonde. Your daughter-in-law, right? Vanessa." The room seemed to tilt. "They came here together often." "Oh yes, every few months or so. Usually Thursday afternoons." Mr. Robert always ordered the same thing, whiskey neat, And she liked those fancy martinis with the olives. He paused, studying my face. You didn't know? I managed to keep my voice steady. Robert mentioned it, I just wasn't sure which hotel. But Tony was already backtracking, probably sensing he'd said too much. I mean, it was probably business meetings, right? Your husband was always talking about expanding the company. Business meetings, right? The kind where your daughter-in-law poses for intimate photographs in hotel suites. I ordered a glass of wine I didn't want and sat at the bar processing this information. Robert and Vanessa had been meeting regularly at this hotel for years. The photograph proved their relationship had crossed lines that shouldn't be crossed. But why hide the evidence instead of exposing her? Then it hit me like a freight train. Robert hadn't hidden that photograph to protect Vanessa. He'd hidden it to protect Michael. My husband had discovered his daughter-in-law's betrayal, and instead of destroying his son's marriage, he'd kept the secret and lived with the knowledge that the woman Michael loved was a fraud. But there was still something that didn't add up. That photograph showed Vanessa with someone, but I'd only seen Robert's watch in the background. Where was the rest of the evidence? Who took the picture? I paid for my wine and walked to the hotel lobby studying the layout. There had to be security cameras, employee records, something that could give me more pieces of this puzzle. As I stood there, lost in thought, I felt someone tap my shoulder. Dorothy! Dorothy Henderson! I turned to find a man in an expensive suit smiling at me. He looked familiar, but I couldn't place him immediately. I'm sorry, I said. Do we know each other? His smile faltered slightly. David Morrison, I was a friend of your husband's. I heard about Robert's passing. My condolences. David Morrison. Why did that name ring a bell? Then I remembered he'd sent flowers to the funeral. The card had simply said, "With sympathy, D. Morrison." Thank you, I said carefully. How did you know Robert? Business associates, he said quickly. We worked together on several projects over the years. He glanced around the hotel lobby nervously. Interesting place to run into you, actually. Robert and I used to meet here sometimes. My radar was pinging like crazy now. Really? When was the last time you saw him? His eyes darted away. Oh, months ago. Well before he got sick. He was already backing away. I should let you go. Again, my condolences. He disappeared into the elevator before I could ask another question, leaving me standing in the lobby with more questions than answers. But I had a name now, David Morrison, and something told me he was the final piece of this sordid puzzle. Finding David Morrison turned out to be easier than I had expected, though it took more patience than I had anticipated. My neighbor Grace had connections at the country club. 40 years of marriage to a prominent lawyer had given her quite the network. David Morrison, Grace had mused over coffee, runs that investment firm downtown. His wife Sandra plays bridge with my sister. Why do you ask? I'd made up some story about potential financial advice, and within 2 days, Grace had arranged for me to accidentally bump into David at the monthly charity luncheon at the Grand View Hotel. Sometimes the best surveillance comes disguised as social events. David looked nervous the moment Grace introduced us, though he tried to hide it behind a charming smile. Mrs. Henderson, he said, shaking my hand with what felt like sweaty palms. My condolences on Robert's passing. He was a good man. Thank you, I replied, studying his face. You knew him well. Business acquaintances, he said quickly, then excused himself to get a drink. I followed at a discreet distance and positioned myself at a nearby table where I could observe him. The man was definitely on edge, checking his phone constantly, drinking faster than was polite at a charity event. When he stepped outside to take a call, I saw my opportunity. I moved close enough to overhear, pretending to admire the hotel's garden. Told you not to call me here. Dorothy Henderson is at the same event. No, I don't think she knows anything, but we can't be careful enough. The timeline got screwed up when Robert died early. We were supposed to have another month. Timeline got screwed up? Another month? The pieces were starting to click. I retreated before he finished his call, but I'd heard enough. David Morrison was definitely connected to whatever Robert had discovered, and Robert's death had disrupted some kind of plan. Later that afternoon, I called Grace back. "That David Morrison seemed nice," I said casually. "Has he lived in Chicago long?" "Oh, yes, for years. Though Sandra mentioned something about them possibly relocating soon. Business opportunities elsewhere," she said. "Why?" "Just curious." But inside, alarm bells were ringing. If David was planning to leave town, it wasn't for business opportunities. It was because he was running from something. That evening, I sat in my living room with the photographs spread out on the coffee table, trying to piece together what I knew. Robert had discovered something about Vanessa and David. David was planning to leave Chicago. Robert's death had disrupted some kind of plan. But what had Robert found, and why hadn't he told Michael immediately? I picked up the photograph again, studying it more carefully. That's when I noticed something I'd missed before, a reflection in the mirror behind Vanessa. It was blurry, but there was definitely someone else in that hotel room, someone holding a camera. My blood chilled as the full implications hit me. This wasn't just evidence of an affair. It was evidence of something much more calculated. And Robert had died before he could expose whatever scheme David and Vanessa had been planning. But Robert had been cleverer than they knew. He'd hidden this evidence where only I would find it, trusting that I'd eventually put the pieces together. "Well, Robert," I thought, carefully placing the photograph back in its hiding place, "this useless old wife is about to finish what you started." I spent the weekend planning my approach like a general preparing for war. By Monday morning, I had photocopies of the picture, a detailed timeline of what I had observed, and a plan that would give Vanessa exactly one chance to tell me the truth. But first, I needed to understand what Robert had really discovered. Monday afternoon, I drove to Henderson Construction. Michael was in a meeting, but I wasn't there to see him. I was there to see Martha Wilson, Robert's longtime secretary who'd stayed on to help with the transition. "Mrs. Henderson?" Martha's face lit up when she saw me. "How lovely to see you. How are you holding up?" "As well as can be expected," I said, settling into the chair across from her desk. "Martha, I was wondering if you could help me with something. In the months before Robert died, did he seem troubled about anything?" Martha's expression grew thoughtful. "Well, now that you mention it, he did seem worried about something. He was working late more often, making calls he didn't want overheard. And about 2 months before he passed, he had me set up a meeting with that lawyer, Mr. Blackwood." 2 months ago? That timeline was crucial. "Yes, and he was very specific about keeping it confidential, even from Michael." Martha lowered her voice. "Between you and me, Mrs. Henderson, I think he was suspicious about some of the contracts we'd been losing. Big projects that should have been easy wins for us." My heart started racing. "Did he say anything specific?" "He mentioned that someone might be feeding information to competitors. He'd started keeping certain bid documents in his personal safe instead of the shared files." Martha glanced around to make sure we weren't overheard, "and he'd been asking questions about Vanessa's access to Michael's computer." There it was, confirmation that Robert had suspected the corporate espionage. "Martha, did Robert ever mention David Morrison?" Her face darkened immediately. "That snake." "Yes, Mr. Robert was very interested in Morrison investments lately. He had me pull all the contracts we'd lost in the past year, and wouldn't you know it, Morrison's clients had won most of them." I thanked Martha and left, my suspicions fully confirmed. Robert had been building a case against David Morrison and, by extension, against Vanessa. But he died before he could act on it. That evening, I made the call I'd been dreading and anticipating in equal measure. "Vanessa, it's Dorothy. I was wondering if you could come by tomorrow afternoon. There's something I'd like to discuss with you." "Oh." Vanessa's voice was carefully neutral. "Of course. Is everything all right?" We'll talk tomorrow, I said and hung up. The trap was set. Now I just had to wait for her to walk into it. Tuesday afternoon arrived, gray and drizzly, matching my mood perfectly. Vanessa showed up precisely on time, looking elegant in a cream-colored suit that probably cost more than some people's monthly salary. "Dorothy," she said, air-kissing my cheek, "you sounded mysterious on the phone. I hope nothing is wrong." "Please sit down," I gestured to the living room. "Can I get you some tea?" "That would be lovely." I made tea I didn't want for a woman I was about to destroy, taking my time to let anticipation build. When I returned with the tray, Vanessa was sitting primly on the sofa, her hands folded in her lap. "So," she said, with that practiced smile, "what did you want to discuss?" I sat down the tea tray and picked up the manila envelope I'd prepared. "Actually, Vanessa, I think you know exactly what this is about." I pulled out the photograph and placed it on the coffee table between us. The change in her expression was instantaneous and complete. The polite mask vanished, replaced with something between fear and fury. "Where did you get that?" she whispered, her voice barely audible. "From my inheritance," I said calmly. "That ugly painting turned out to be worth more than all of us realized." Vanessa stared at the photograph for a long moment, then looked up at me with calculating eyes. "What do you want?" I settled into their expensive leather sofa, the one they'd bought with money from Henderson Construction, and waited. She walked in at 10:30, still glowing from her workout, yoga mat tucked under her arm. The sight of me sitting in her living room stopped her dead in her tracks. "Dorothy, what are you doing here? How did you get in?" "I still have a key," I said pleasantly. "We need to talk, Vanessa." Something in my tone must have warned her because she set down her yoga mat carefully and crossed her arms. "If this is about what I said at the lawyer's office, I think you're overreacting." "Oh, this isn't about that at all." I pulled out the photograph and placed it on the coffee table between us. "This is about your extracurricular activities." Vanessa stared at the picture for a full 10 seconds before her face went completely white. "Where did you get that?" "From my inheritance. Turns out that ugly painting was more valuable than any of us realized." I leaned back comfortably. "Robert knew all about you and David Morrison, the affair, the business espionage, the Thursday afternoon hotel meetings, everything." "You don't understand," Vanessa said, sinking into a chair across from me. "David and it's complicated. Corporate espionage usually is." I pulled out another document, David's confession, which I'd recorded on my phone and had transcribed. "He told me everything, Vanessa. How you've been feeding Henderson Construction's confidential information, helping him undercut Michael's bids, sabotaging your own husband's business." Vanessa's composure cracked completely. "Robert's dead. That investigation died with him." "Oh, sweetie," I said, and for the first time let my real feelings show in my voice. "You really think I'm just some useless old wife, don't you?" I pulled up my phone and showed her the screen. A number I dialed but hadn't connected yet. One button push and I'm calling Michael. Another call goes to the police. A third goes to the Chicago Tribune business section. They love a good corporate espionage story. I set the phone down carefully. "Or we can discuss this like civilized people." Vanessa stared at me like she was seeing me for the first time. Gone was the dismissive contempt, replaced by something that looked almost like respect and definitely fear. "What do you want?" she whispered. I smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. "Well, since you asked so nicely, let me tell you exactly what's going to happen next." The really delicious part was just beginning. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, settling back into that overpriced sofa. "You're going to tell Michael everything. The affair, the stolen business information, all of it. And then you're going to figure out how to compensate Henderson Construction for every contract you helped steal." Vanessa's mouth fell open. "I can't do that. He'll divorce me." "Probably," I shrugged, like we were discussing the weather. "Should have thought of that before you decided to betray him." She stood up suddenly, pacing to the window. "You don't understand what it was like being married to Michael. He's so predictable. David made me feel alive again." "How romantic. I'm sure that'll comfort you when you're explaining corporate espionage to the authorities." I checked my watch. You have until tomorrow to decide how you want to handle this. The easy way or the way that involves police. She spun around, and I saw a flash of the calculating woman who'd been manipulating my family for years. What if I refuse? What if I call your bluff? Try me. The words came out colder than I intended. I buried a husband last month, discovered my son inherited millions while I got table scraps, and learned my daughter-in-law has been stealing from us for years. Do you really think I have anything left to lose? Something in my voice must have convinced her because she sank back into her chair, looking smaller somehow. There's something else, she said quietly, something you should know about Robert's death. My blood chilled. What do you mean? David and we were supposed to meet Robert that day. He'd called us, said he wanted to discuss the situation one final time before she swallowed hard, before he told Michael everything. The room seemed to tilt. Go on. We met him at the hotel bar. Robert was furious, said our month was up and he was done protecting Michael from the truth. That's when David tried to bargain with him, offer him money to stay quiet longer. And Robert got so angry, he started yelling about integrity and family loyalty. Then he grabbed his chest and just collapsed. Vanessa's voice was barely a whisper. We called 911 immediately, but it was too late. I stared at her, trying to process this information. You were with him when he died? In the hotel lobby, there were witnesses, other guests, hotel staff. The paramedics said he probably died instantly. She looked up at me with what might have been genuine remorse. I know you probably think we caused it, but we didn't. We tried to help. For some reason, this version felt more honest than I had expected. Robert had always been prone to stress-induced chest pains, especially when he was angry. Why didn't you tell anyone you were there? Because we knew how it would look. Robert's daughter-in-law and her friend being the last people to see him alive? Vanessa shook her head. David's lawyer advised us to stay quiet unless the police specifically asked. I stood up slowly, my head spinning with this new information. You realize this doesn't change anything, right? You still betrayed Michael. You still stole from his business. I know, she said quietly. And I'm sorry. I know you probably don't believe that, but I am. Maybe she was. But sorry doesn't undo years of betrayal. 24 hours, Vanessa. Decide how you want to handle this. The easy way or the way that involves police. For the first time since I'd arrived, she looked truly defeated. I walked to their kitchen and poured myself a glass of water, mainly to give myself time to think. My hands were shaking, whether from anger or grief, I wasn't sure. Vanessa had followed me, hovering in the doorway like she wasn't sure whether to run or try to explain further. Dorothy, please, you have to understand we were scared, confused. Scared of being exposed as thieves and adulterers? I said, setting the glass down carefully. Tell me, Vanessa, how many family dinners have you sat through knowing you were stealing from us? She started crying then, big tears that might have worked on someone else. I never meant for it to go so far. It started small, just little bits of information David could use to be more competitive. And it grew into $250,000 in lost business. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling Michael. Wait, she said desperately. Please, can't we work something out between us? Woman to woman? I almost laughed. Woman to woman? You mean the way you worked things out when you were helping David steal our contracts? My phone was already ringing. Michael's voice answered, tense with worry. Mom, what's wrong? You sound upset. I need you to come home, Michael. There are some things you need to know about your wife. What kind of things? I looked directly at Vanessa as I spoke, the kind that explained why Henderson Construction has been losing so many bids lately. After I hung up, Vanessa collapsed into a kitchen chair. He's going to hate me. Probably, I agreed, but he deserves to know the truth. And the thing about Robert's death, you won't tell him about that, will you? It would destroy him to know his father died angry and disappointed. I considered this. She wasn't wrong. Michael was already struggling with grief and guilt over losing his father. Learning that Robert had died in the middle of confronting betrayal would be devastating. That depends, I said finally, on how honest you are with him about everything else. 20 minutes later, Michael walked through the front door looking haggard. He'd obviously left work in a hurry. His tie was askew, and his hair looked like he'd been running his hands through it. Mom, he said, embracing me briefly before turning to Vanessa, What's this about? I pulled out the photograph and set it on the kitchen counter. Your wife has been having an affair with David Morrison. She's also been feeding him confidential information about Henderson Construction's bids and finances. The color drained from Michael's face as he stared at the picture. When he looked up at Vanessa, his expression was unreadable. Is this true? Vanessa's face was streaked with tears, but she nodded. It started about 2 years ago. I never, Michael, I'm so sorry. 2 years. His voice was completely flat. You've been betraying me for 2 years? It wasn't supposed to be betrayal. David said he just wanted to be more competitive, that a little inside information was normal in business. Normal, Michael's composure finally cracked. Vanessa, you've been stealing from our family business to help your lover. I watched my son process the betrayal, seeing him transform from the trusting man I'd raised into someone harder, more suspicious. It broke my heart, but it was necessary. How much? He asked quietly. We're still calculating the exact amount, I said, but it's substantial. Multiple six-figure contracts that we should have won. Michael sat down heavily at the kitchen table, staring at the photograph. Dad suspected something, didn't he? In the last few months, he was asking me strange questions about our bid processes, about who had access to our files. Yes, I said gently. He'd been investigating for about 2 months before he died. Did he know? Michael looked up at Vanessa. Did he know about you and David? Vanessa nodded miserably. He confronted us about a month before he died. He said he was going to tell you everything, but he didn't, Michael said, his voice hollow. You protected him right up until the end. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Vanessa's quiet sobbing. Finally, Michael stood up. I want you out of this house by tonight. Michael, please, out, he repeated, his voice stronger now. We'll discuss the financial arrangements through lawyers. After Vanessa left to pack, Michael and I sat in his living room. His living room now, truly, his, for the first time. The silence was heavy, but not uncomfortable. I should have seen it, he said finally. The signs were all there. You trusted her, I said. That's not a flaw, Michael. It's what makes you a good man. He was quiet for a long moment. What happens now? Now we rebuild, I said simply. Henderson Construction will survive this. Your father built it to last. What I didn't tell him was that Robert had built in some insurance policies that even I hadn't discovered yet. Michael took the news about the affair better than I expected. It was the business espionage that really got to him. The betrayal of everything Robert had built, everything Michael was trying to preserve. $247,000, he repeated, staring at the evidence I'd laid out on his coffee table. You cost us almost $250,000. Vanessa sat curled in the corner of the couch, mascara streaked down her cheeks. Michael, I'm sorry. I never meant... Never meant what? To get caught? Michael's voice was deadly quiet. Because you sure meant to help David steal our clients, didn't you? I watched my son transform before my eyes. The gentle, trusting man I'd raised was gone, replaced by someone harder, more suspicious. It broke my heart, but it was necessary. The police are on their way, I told him. Vanessa has some information about your father's death that they need to hear. Michael's head snapped up. What information? Vanessa looked at me pleadingly, but I just raised my eyebrow. This was her mess to clean up. Your father, he didn't die alone, she whispered. David and I were with him when he had the heart attack. The silence in the room was deafening. Michael stood up slowly, his face going through a series of expressions: confusion, understanding, horror, and finally rage. You were there. His voice was barely controlled. You were there and you didn't call 911? We did call eventually. We panicked. How long? Michael's hands were clenched into fists at his sides. Vanessa couldn't meet his eyes. 20 minutes, maybe longer. Michael turned away from her, walking to the window. When he spoke again, his voice was flat, emotionless. Get out. Michael, please, get out! The explosion of rage made both Vanessa and me jump. Get out of my house. Get out of my life. And if I ever see you again, I'll finish what my father should have done 6 months ago. Vanessa stood up shakily. Where am I supposed to go? I don't care, Michael said without turning around. Call David. Call your parents. Call a lawyer. But get out of my sight before the police get here. She looked at me one last time, maybe hoping for some mercy, some sign that this could still be fixed. I just smiled and waved. 20 minutes later, we watched through the window as Vanessa loaded 2 suitcases into her car and drove away. The police arrived 10 minutes after that. Detective Sarah Rodriguez was thorough and professional. She took statements from both Michael and me, documented all the evidence I'd collected, and assured us that they would be reopening the investigation into Robert's death. Based on what you've told me, we'll be looking at charges of negligent homicide at minimum, she said. Possibly more, depending on what we find. After the police left, Michael and I sat in his living room. His living room now. Truly his. For the first time since Vanessa had moved in. The silence was comfortable, rather than tense. I'm sorry, he said finally, for what she said at the lawyer's office, for not standing up for you. I patted his hand. You couldn't have known. But I should have seen it. The signs were all there. He shook his head. Dad tried to tell me something was wrong. I thought he was just being paranoid. That's when I realized there was one more secret I hadn't shared yet. One final revelation that would change everything. Michael, I said carefully, there's something else you need to know about your father's plans. He looked at me with tired eyes. Mom, I don't think I can handle any more surprises today. This is a good one, I promise. I pulled out a document I'd been saving for the right moment. One I discovered in Robert's safe deposit box along with the painting. Remember how upset you were that Robert left me just that painting? Yeah, and I felt terrible about that. Dad should have provided better for you. I handed him the paper. He did. Michael stared at the document, reading it twice, before looking up at me with confusion. I don't understand. This is a promissory note for $800,000, signed 3 months before your father died. Apparently, Robert had been borrowing against his life insurance policy to cover some business expenses. I smiled at his bewildered expression. Expenses that, according to this document, he owed to me. But, Mom, you never lent Dad money. Didn't I? I pulled out another sheet, a detailed accounting that Martha from the office had helped me reconstruct. Your father was very careful with his records. Michael, every family dinner where I insisted on paying the check, every birthday gift I gave him that was really a business expense in disguise, every time I helped with household expenses that freed up his cash for the company. Michael set the document down with shaking hands. You mean all those times you said you just wanted to contribute? I was investing in Henderson Construction. Your father was just honest enough to keep track of exactly how much. I leaned back in my chair. The life insurance policy pays out $1.2 million. After settling this debt, there's still plenty left for the business. But why didn't he just tell us about the loan? Because he wanted to see what kind of people we really were when he thought he'd left everything to you. I thought about Robert's final gift. Not just the painting, but the test it represented. He knew Vanessa would show her true colors if she thought I had gotten nothing. And I failed the test, Michael said quietly. I let her mock you. I didn't stand up for you. You passed a different test, I said gently. You're sitting here now doing the right thing. That's what matters. Michael was quiet for a long time, processing everything. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, stronger, more decisive. So, what happens now? Do you want to be repaid immediately? Actually, I said smiling, I have a different proposal. Convert the debt into a partnership. You need someone you can trust helping run the business, and I need something meaningful to do with my time. Partners? Michael's face lit up for the first time since this whole mess began. Partners, I confirmed. Your father built something worth preserving. Let's make sure it stays in the family. The real family. That's when we heard the car pulling into the driveway. Through the window, I could see David Morrison getting out of a silver BMW, his face grim with determination. Well, I said, straightening my shoulders, looks like we're about to have another visitor. This was about to get very interesting. The doorbell rang and Michael went to answer it. I could hear their voices. Michael's cold and controlled. David's desperate and pleading. Please, just 5 minutes. I need to explain what really happened. You've explained enough, Michael replied. But I called out from the living room. Let him in, Michael. We might as well hear what he has to say. David walked into the living room looking like he'd aged 10 years since our last encounter. His expensive suit was wrinkled, his usually perfect hair disheveled. Mrs. Henderson, I know you have no reason to listen to me, but I need you to know that Robert's death wasn't our fault. We didn't delay calling for help. Then why did Vanessa tell me you did? David's face crumbled. Because she panicked when she realized you might go to the police. She thought if she made it sound like we'd done something criminal, you'd focus on that instead of the business theft. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. So what really happened that day? Robert collapsed in the hotel lobby. We were arguing, yes, but there were other people around. The hotel staff called 911 immediately. We stayed with him until the paramedics arrived. But he swallowed hard. It was massive. The doctor said he probably wouldn't have survived even if it had happened in a hospital. For some reason, this version felt more truthful. It also aligned better with what I knew about Robert's heart condition. Why should we believe you now? Michael asked. Because I'm finished lying, David said simply. My business is ruined, my reputation is shot, and my wife is filing for divorce. I have nothing left to lose by telling the truth. We spent the next hour talking through everything. David's cooperation with authorities, the financial restitution he'd promised, and his genuine remorse over his actions. By the time he left, I almost felt sorry for him. Almost. You know what the strangest part is, Michael said, after David's car disappeared down the street? I feel relieved. All this time, I knew something was wrong with my marriage, but I kept trying to fix it. Now I know it was never fixable. Your father used to say that you can't build a strong foundation on lies, I told him. Vanessa and David built their whole relationship on deception. It was bound to collapse eventually. Over the next few weeks, the legal proceedings moved swiftly. Vanessa pleaded guilty to conspiracy and agreed to pay substantial restitution rather than face more serious charges. David's cooperation with authorities helped recover most of the stolen business, along with penalties and interest. The promissory note from Robert's estate provided the working capital we needed to rebuild Henderson Construction's reputation. More importantly, it gave Michael and me a solid legal framework for our partnership. You know, Michael said one afternoon as we reviewed new contract proposals, I think Dad would be proud of what we're building here. I looked around the office, the same space where Robert had worked for 30 years, where he'd built something lasting from nothing. I think you're right. 6 months later, Henderson Construction was thriving under our joint leadership. Michael had grown into the kind of leader Robert would have admired. Strong, but fair. Trusting, but not naive. And I discovered that business ownership at 70 was surprisingly invigorating. Sometimes people underestimate older women, thinking we're just harmless grandmothers who can be dismissed and forgotten. But here's what I learned. We've had decades to observe, to understand, and to develop patience. When we finally decide to act, we do it with the accumulated wisdom of a lifetime. Robert's painting hangs in my office now, right behind my desk, where I can see it every day. It reminds me that sometimes the most valuable things come disguised as worthless gifts, and that love, real love, finds a way to protect the people who matter most, even from beyond the grave. As for Vanessa, she's learning that orange really isn't her color. She's also learning that actions have consequences, something she managed to avoid for far too long. But that's a lesson for another day. Today, Michael and I have a business to run and contracts to win the honest way, through hard work, fair dealing, and the kind of integrity that Robert Henderson built his legacy on. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's just living well and building something better than what came before. The phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Another potential client. Another opportunity to prove that Henderson Construction was stronger than ever. I smiled as I reached for the phone. After all, this useless old wife had work to do. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to subscribe and feel free to share your story in the comments. Your voice matters.